Hello and welcome to a Week 14 edition of the quote-unquote expert, quote-unquote Roundtable. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm the father of the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry. And as always, I am joined by a man connected to his Ethernet by him, a man who came to the show via canoe, a man who shaved his beard and cut his hair, but it's still everybody's favorite hippie. It's JMToWin. JM, what's going on?
I ran into people in Nashville who didn't recognize me. I haven't had the beard and the hair for a year, but apparently people don't watch us; they just listen. Doing well, man. I was on my canoe earlier, just on the river, whatever, like I do, and I came across this mug floating in the water, famous mustache mug. So I'm good to go, man. We had a good slate. I got my famous mustache mug. Got some tea, so let's have a fun time.
Do you have that special hippie tea in there? What's it called that all the hippies are drinking now? That special tea or coffee? You know what I'm talking about?
Is that kombucha? Is that what you're talking about? I don't know. I'm drinking yerba mate. That's like the old hippie drink. So
I see.
I'm behind the hippie times, I guess, but it'll keep me awake.
All right. I love it. This week's slate on DK, as always, we're going to be talking about DraftKings scoring, DraftKings salaries, which certainly makes a huge difference. I hope that you guys are aware of that by now. This week's slate on DraftKings certainly revolves around two players who are expected to see ownership in the 40 to 50% range or higher, Gio Bernard and Josh Gordon. I think how you want to play the slate partially depends on if you want to eat the chalk with those guys, and we'll talk about how viable a fade would be on either. But, just having those guys on the slate, I know we talk about it a lot. A lot of people think that the slate is terrible when there's two really chalky guys or when there's an obvious play. I actually think that it gives us a chance to take some value from people who don't play those guys, and then also use our money more optimally instead of trying to squeeze in guys on DK that we're really thin about a lot of times. So to me, I like these kind of slates. What do you think, Jam?
I love these kind of slates. There's a lot of opportunity to think differently from people. There's a lot of opportunity to take really high floor, high ceiling plays. You mentioned these two chalky guys who are underpriced, but you also have Larry Fitzgerald's underpriced, Shepard's underpriced, Marquise Goodwin's underpriced, Kaiser and Gabbert are in a great spot. I've had some salary, some roster construction where I've had $2,000 in salary left over, and I liked the team. You have to figure out where to spend up or whether or not you want to spend up. So I love weeks like this. I think one thing we can talk about when we get to the Gio situation is we can talk about some of these other low-priced pivots and what percentage of the time we think that they would outscore Gio. Because I do think that there's some other – Frank Gore, we'll get to these guys in a minute, but Frank Gore, Andre Ellington, even Mike Davis, these guys could outscore Gio 20, 30% of the time, and the ownership is going to be disproportionate to that. So I think there's also good pivots in tournaments, not obviously the best on paper plays, but a lot of different directions we can go on this slate. One of the lowest stress slates of the season this year.
All right, let's start the quarterback position. In a week where we certainly have the money to pay up at quarterback, I don't see a lot of good options to pay up. So let's start at the top for this. We have Carson Wentz. We have Phillip Rivers. I think they're okay plays. We have Jared Goff, we have Alex Smith. I think they would all kind of fall into the okay range. I think Phillip Rivers would be my favorite out of that group. Carson Wentz has shown an extremely high floor and has been shown to be matchup proof. Do you think the Eagles will play well coming off of that loss last week? Does anybody in the higher range at quarterback intrigue you?
Yeah, you named some guys that I think can get you 20, possibly even 25 points. I think the bigger question is obviously, whether that's worth it. You look at somebody like Gabbert, who again we'll get to in a minute, but this is the team that throws the ball at the second highest rate, taking on a Tennessee team that people don't run the ball against. And they can't defend slot receivers, so that Gabbert to Larry Fitzgerald connection gives you a huge floor. Kaiser with Gordon, Coleman, and Njoku to throw to gives you a much higher floor than I think most people will anticipate that spot having. So, yeah, Wentz, I don't love the matchup. It would be tough for me to pay $7,100 hoping for 20 to 25 points when I think I can get that for cheaper. Rivers, I like the matchup quite a bit. I am a little concerned that the Chargers just destroy Washington in this spot. So I think that 20 points, he's been consistently getting that. He's rarely getting over that. So again, I think these guys are fine plays. I think the way that I would actually use these higher priced guys is in game stacks. So for example, the Chiefs and Raiders, this is a game that both teams need in order to, I mean, whoever doesn't win that division is missing the playoffs, and they're in a 3-way tie for first. So both teams need this win. That's the sort of game in which you could see both teams getting more aggressive as things move along. So if that happens, Derek Carr and Alex Smith could trade blows all day. That makes sense to just load up on a game like that. But in an individual sense, I don't think that any of these quarterbacks make more sense than the cheaper guys. The one exception would be Matthew Stafford. And obviously there's a question about his hand. I mean, have you heard my anticipation right now is that he's going to start, but we won't know if he's actually himself. We won't know if he can actually push the ball outside the numbers. Are you hearing anything differently on that?
Yeah, no, he's going to play. One of the toughest guys in the league, which is so funny because he had the injury-prone label early in his career, which was such a joke. But anyways,
he broke his collarbone or something, and everyone's like, this guy.
The worst. But yeah, I mean, Matthew Stafford, obviously an awesome matchup. I don't know. He was able to throw in practice, but not a lot in front of reporters. It certainly seems like it's going to bother him to some degree, but that's the kind of thing we might be able to get a report on from Schefter or Rappaport or Glazer on Sunday morning. So we'll certainly have an eye on that. But yeah, he would be an awesome tournament play because I think right now nobody's planning to play Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, Matthew Stafford is just in an absolute smash spot if he's healthy. My concern is that he's going to be stuck throwing underneath passes to Golden Tate all day and can't really push the ball outside the numbers to Marvin Jones for the big upside. Russell Wilson is also theoretically in play as a guy who has an enormous amount of upside as their entire offense. Obviously, he's taking on one of the best defenses we've seen in the last decade. So floor is a concern. I think that the Jags are giving up 8.5 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, which is just obscenely low. So yeah, I mean, any thoughts on Russ or anybody else in this price range that you're kind of leaning toward?
Yeah, I would disagree with the way you described Russ. I would say he has a high floor thanks to his volume and rushing ability, but the ceiling in this matchup is capped because you're not ripping off big plays against the Jaguars. It's highly unlikely you get into a shootout with this defense and Blake Bortles. So I would say the floor is fine for Russ. From a ceiling perspective, I would be more concerned on him. And yeah, out of the other guys, I think Alex Smith, who I never really like, but such a good matchup against Oakland, playing at home. Do think the Chiefs in a desperation spot will play well here. So he would probably be my favorite out of that group. But yeah, for in terms of just raw points, I think Rivers, as you mentioned, would be my favorite. Let's move down into the 5K range. I think my first instinct this week was I like Dak Prescott a lot. The more that I've thought about it, I've moved off him a little bit out of concern for on the road in the division. Out of concern for, I think, a lot of sharp money coming in on the Giants from what I've seen so far, and out of concern for just pace of play. We've seen them play extremely slow lately, and concern just because his wideouts are just not making big plays for him. So I think I'm probably going to move off Dak. There's certainly a lot of options below him, such as Blaine Gabbert, who you mentioned, such as DeShone Kizer, who you mentioned, Jimmy Garoppolo, Tom Savage. So what do you think about Dak and the rest of this 5K range?
It's kind of funny, right? We've what is Des Bryant, 29 years old or something? We're still waiting for him to become an elite receiver. It was 3 years in his career before he had a 100-yard game. He has very little after catch ability. I mean, he catches the ball and gets tackled. He's not fast. He doesn't run great routes. He can make great contested catches. He's a physical freak. So, I mean, I think that the thought with Dak is, okay, with the weapon with Dez to throw to, that can support him. I think the Cowboys are kind of seeing that that's not fully the case. And we saw him throw only 22 times last week. I'm a little concerned that, and same thing with you. Yeah. First glance, it was okay, do I want Dak? Do I want Kizer? Do I want Gabbert? But yeah, I kind of think that we could see both teams just really slow down the pace. The Giants have done the same thing since Odell Beckham went down. This is a spot where we could see each team run 55 plays, keep the ball on the ground. I have slight concerns for Sterling Shepard because of that as well. Obviously, he's a tremendous play, but yeah, I do think that the pace is going to be a potential issue in this game. My focus is on Garoppolo, who I'm concerned about the lack of weapons, but we can get to that when we get to wide receivers. And then Kaiser and Gabbert. Gabbert didn't stand out to me at first, but as I started digging in, it just makes a lot of sense against Tennessee. I mean, he has a high floor from his rushing. He has a high floor from the fact this team passes a ton. He has a high floor from the fact that Tennessee forces teams to pass a ton. He's completed 78% of his passes to Larry Fitzgerald and like 36% to other wide receivers. So as long as he keeps that, between the numbers connection going with Fitz, I think he's a great play. And I think that Kaiser's a great play. Do you have a preference between the two, or do you think that one has a higher floor than the other?
Yeah, I prefer Kaiser. 5.5 DK points per game rushing alone for DeShone Kizer. I mean, think about that. When you get a guy who's 4,900 at home in a good matchup in a game I expect the Browns to win, has awesome weapons now. Like, think about these weapons, not just
that was like a say and move on. You said I expect the Browns to win like an 0-12 team, and you're just moving on from that. Let's call that a bold call. I mean, I'm with you on it, but that's
that's not even bold. Like Seahawks winning last week by the line was more bold. At one point, that line was like 6.
That's fair.
This line is like
this is like the Packers are in playoff contention if they win this week and get Aaron Rodgers back.
You know what it is, man? Like
the Browns can't win.
You know what it is? Brett Hundley is just like so dead to me after last week. I hate myself so much. We came on here last week and talked about, both of us agreed Jameis Winston was the lock, and somehow I just ended up with Brett Hundley. And for the rest of my life, I'm going to regret and hate Brett Hundley for that. So, yes.
You may never see him on the field after this week, too.
Oh, my God. Such a disaster. But, yeah, I think Browns will play well and win. I don't think that's really a hot take at all. And yeah, I mean, Kaiser's rushing floor. But think about the weapons he has. Duke Johnson, David Njoku. And then you add in like Coleman and Josh Gordon, arguably like one of the more talented wideout duos in the league. So, I mean, it's really hard to see DeShone Kizer failing here. He's played better lately. He had really tough matchups lately. I think his last 3 were like Jacksonville, Cincinnati, and somebody else that's really stout. So
yeah, I mean, I brought that up last week with his games with Coleman and without Gordon had been Jacksonville, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Baltimore.
Yeah.
It doesn't get tougher than that. I mean, I think that Kizer is a better quarterback than, I don't know that he's good, but I think he's a better quarterback than he has looked. I mean, he's been throwing to scrubs in good matchups, and he's had tough matchups when he's had guys to throw to. So we could see, easily 25 points from him in this spot. I guess there are some slight game flow concerns just because we don't expect the Packers to be able to bring it back. But I think that it's encouraging to me how aggressive Hugh Jackson was just dialing up plays to Josh Gordon, how aggressive Kizer was just throwing bombs to him with Casey Hayward covering him. I think it was 7 passes, 20 yards downfield, something insane like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that no matter what, Gordon's going to get his looks, no matter what, Kaiser's going to have his opportunities. So I'm with you on that one.
One guy we didn't mention is Case Keenum. I think that there's like time for Minnesota to regress a little bit, at least offensively, but you can't argue with the way Case Keenum has played lately, and the Panthers have been getting absolutely destroyed by wideouts lately. Do you have any interest in Case Keenum as kind of a tournament play at 6,100?
My approach this week is kind of to not overthink things and not take any of these low floor, high ceiling plays because there's so many high floor, high ceiling plays. I think that if you get heavier into tournament play or large field tournament play, stuff like that makes sense. I'm actually shifting my focus this week to go pretty cash heavy and then just small field, high dollar tournaments. So I won't have interest there. I do agree that the Panthers I don't think they're below average against the pass, but they're average against the pass. I mean, their reputation is more built on the fact that they're the Cowboys from 2 years ago. They're running out the clock and not allowing teams to run a lot of plays. So I could definitely see, I like Thielen this week, so I could definitely see Keenum doing well, but it's not a play that I will be on myself.
All right. Anything else at quarterback?
Not anything that I'm interested in.
All right, let's move to running back, and obviously the position revolves around Gio Bernard. His backups this week will be Brian Hill and maybe the kid Tre'Davious White, I believe his name is, from the practice squad. Not sure if they called him up yet or if they are going to call him up. Either way, they clearly didn't trust Brian Hill last week, gave him 0 snaps, even though Joe Mixon left in the second quarter. Gio Bernard, look, I mean, the Bengals got low on Gio Bernard. Like, Joe Mixon was not performing whatsoever. and Gio Bernard's snap count was decreasing even as Jeremy Hill went on IR. So like Bengals don't love him, but they don't really have a choice here. And we know where he excels. Similar to Theo Riddick last week, we know where he excels when he's on the field. He's going to get a lot of dump offs. So on DraftKings scoring, it's really hard to see Gio Bernard failing at 3,100, which is just, we haven't seen prices like this on DraftKings for guys that are in play. So I think a fair touch projection for Gio Bernard is in the 15 to 20 range, and he's 3,100. You mentioned not overthinking it. Should the people out there even be thinking about trying to fade Gio?
In cash games, obviously, I think the answer is no. And I think that the 10, 12% of the field that doesn't use him is automatically putting themselves behind everyone else. If they luck into Gio having a bad game or getting injured and they're in the top 10% of the cash game field because of that, I mean, fine. But that's like at 3,100, it just makes no sense to not take him. You made a good point with the touches. This isn't Bilal Powell where we all just freaked out and we're like, okay, Bilal Powell, all the touches, and Elijah McGuire was sitting there. And, a couple people texted me on Saturday that week and were saying basically, isn't McGuire going to get isn't he maybe 1 out of every 3 times he would outscore Powell in this spot? Like, we don't have a situation like that with Gio. Gio's going to touch the ball. So, and like you said, he gets catches. I think that the Bengals are going to go pass heavy here just because Gio can't run between the tackles, 20 times, or they don't want to do that. So pass heavy helps him, run heavy helps him. It's not like the Bears are a team that is just going to control this game. So like you said, it's really hard to see him failing. It's really hard to see him falling shy of 12 points in a bad game. With that said, this is not a normal DraftKings week. This is not a week where the pricing is super tight and you got to take this $3,100 guy. So in tournaments, I think there's a lot of cases to be made. On my Monday Night Pod a couple weeks ago, Grant Neefer was talking about how he cashed in all tournaments, won in double ups without Julio Jones the week that Julio put up 50. How does that happen? Well, if you get 20 points from every guy on your team, you're going to be in the top 2 or 3% in tourneys. So I think that it's totally viable that Gio gets 12, 15 points, and you could just go mid-range across the board and get 20 points from everybody. I think it's totally viable that you could go Frank Gore, Andre Ellington, or Mike Davis and outscore Gio. That's not the likeliest scenario, but I think any of those could happen, and they'll all be way under-owned. Do you have thoughts on Davis, Ellington, and Gore before I throw in my thoughts on them?
Yeah, with Will Fuller being active and they need a body behind Lamar Miller, I understand that Andre Ellington's going to run some slot snaps, but I mean, I don't think that's a place that I would definitely consider. I think Mike Davis would be a more likely play that I would make just because if you're going to beat Jacksonville, you theoretically do it with the run. That said, I do expect this Jacksonville defense to overwhelm Seattle's offensive line, which would be a concern for me on Mike Davis. So the one guy you didn't mention in that sub 4K range is Kerwin Williams with Adrian Peterson out again. Kerwin didn't see a target last week, which is a major concern, but I don't think he's bad in the pass game. It's just that's the way it went. DJ Foster ended up getting 5 targets, but I think Kerwin at 39 and Mike Davis at 37. You know me, I don't play Frank Gore, so he's out for me. And yeah, Andre Ellington would scare me. I mean, how many Texans can we be high on? Like, I want to play Will Fuller. I want to play Steven Anderson. I want to play DeAndre Hopkins. I think Lamar Miller is okay. Like, how many Texans can we like in one game?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I've messed around with some rosters that have Gio and Ellington together, and you can imagine what that allows you to fit when you also have Josh Gordon and one of the cheap quarterbacks. So I think that's viable. Ellington's definitely the thinnest play on that roster. I do think he's going to get some slot work, and we've seen that the Texans don't really love giving Lamar Miller more than 20 touches. They've done it a couple times, but San Francisco is facing the most or second most running back rush attempts in the NFL. It's because they run such a fast-paced offense. They're also typically behind, which may not be the case this week. But yeah, I do think that Ellington will get 6 or 7 touches out of the backfield and probably 4 or 5 catches out of the slot. I think he's totally viable. Frank Gore has averaged 18 carries a game the last 5 weeks, or 18 touches per game. Everyone will be, not everyone, but people will be looking to pay up for LaShawn McCoy in the same game. He's averaging 16 touches per game. Obviously, McCoy's a better player, but 18 touches against one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. Gore gets 2 or 3 catches every game. It makes a lot of sense at 3,900. I think you get 10 points in a worst case scenario. I think he can easily get 15 to 17. And then Mike Davis, I don't love. I think that he's unlikely to play well. I think the same thing about Kerwin Williams, but I think they're both in play. But point being, I mean, there's just a ton that we can go to in this cheap range. And I don't think that's the only way to pivot off Gio. I think that the other ways are just to go, mid-priced across the board with a lot of good mid-priced plays this week. I do think that Gio puts up 12 points in a bad game. I expect him to get over 20. So I love Gio this week. But if we're just talking game theory and what to do in tournaments, definitely makes sense to move off of him on some teams and try some different things.
I think we should talk about Lamar Miller because he's a guy that I'm always really hesitant to click on. And Jordan Howard, shockingly to me, ended up at 28% owned in the Millie Maker last week because he was home against San Francisco. I assume with Alfred Blue out, with Dante Foreman out, with Lamar Miller at 5,800, Lamar Miller is going to be very popular. Do you think that is good chalk or bad chalk? Because to me, pretty much any time Lamar Miller is chalk, I think it's bad. But this is a pretty nice spot for him given the backup situation, given the matchup.
How chalky?
I think I have 30%, 25.
What?
Let me check.
Yeah, I built a team on Monday or Tuesday with Lamar Miller, and I had that feeling that everybody has. Oh, God, Lamar Miller, really? So I don't know. I mean, I think people like Jamal Williams in this range. People like Marshawn Lynch. People like P. Ryan. I'm hoping that kind of spreads out ownership a little bit. People want to get up to Gurley. But yeah, if Lamar Miller's 30% owned.
No, I'm sorry. I have 16% right now. I forgot Todd Gurley is going to soak up 30%.
Okay. Yeah, at that range, 15 to 20, I'd be fine with it. That's not enough to move me off of him. I think that we basically, like I said, I think Gore gets 10 points in a bad game and 15 to 17 in a good game. I think Lamar Miller gets 12 in a bad game and 22 to 25 in a good game. So, I mean, if you can find the salary to get up to him, I think he's a really strong play. I think he'll see the work. He can catch passes even if, this isn't Jordan Howard. He can catch passes even if they fall behind, even if this turns into a shootout. Andre Ellington's not going to be used between the tackles much. So I think that Miller's pretty safe. I think we do see him get over 20 touches this week, which is a rarity for him. I like him more than P. Ryan, who stood out to me more at first, just because we saw P. Ryan lose involvement when the Redskins fell behind. This is obviously a spot where that could happen again. He's a good tournament play just because if Washington keeps it close, he'll get 20-plus touches in a phenomenal matchup. I like Miller more than Marshawn Lynch. I like Lynch, but I'm not sold that his work is going to be there. I think it will be because Oakland needs this game, but there's risk there. And then Jamal Williams, I'm still a little concerned that maybe Aaron Jones gets more involved. He's looked good this year as well. So I like all those guys, but I like Miller the most of the bunch at the moment.
You didn't mention one guy in that 5K range, Alfred Morris, who's coming off of a 27 carry game, gets to face the Giants. We already talked about how Dallas appears to want to go extremely run heavy, even in the absence of Zeke. And Alf Morris has played awesome, not the best in the past game, but do you have any thoughts on Alf at 5,500?
Yeah, I think he's a strong play. You know me, I'm typically going to miss out on the 20-point game from the guy who doesn't catch passes. So I probably won't be there. I do think he's a strong play. I think he gets over 20 carries again. It's obviously a good spot for him as well.
We didn't mention your boy. You've rostered Duke Johnson more than anybody in DFS this year. Are you going to Duke Johnson again?
No. And so the mistake I made last week, because I rostered him last week, which was his worst game of the season, for a guy averaging almost 14 DraftKings points a game and priced under 5K, but and the best matchup he had on the year. But I think that what we're going to see is just that Kaiser wants to throw the ball downfield. Hugh Jackson wants to get plays to Josh Gordon. I think that we'll see Duke Johnson become less heavily used. I could be completely wrong. I mean, if he's involved the way he's been before, I mean, people don't realize how good this guy is on the field, and people don't realize how good his scores have been in DFS this year. He's consistently putting up a floor of 10 points, a ceiling north of 20. He was getting 9 points a game just from pass game involvement coming into last week. So anything he adds beyond that, anything he adds on the ground, all of that's just bonus above 9 points. I'm not certain that his workload is going to remain what it was if it does, he's an awesome play. I'll probably miss out if he posts like a 25-point game this week.
Amir Abdullah is questionable. If he ends up scratched late again, Theoretic is now 4,500. Do you have any interest in Theo at that price?
Yeah, but I think he's a worse play than all those sub 4K guys you mentioned. I mean, we saw Green get 11 carries last week. They don't love giving Riddick the between the tackles work, and they really don't love giving him goal line work. That goal line or inside the 5 rushing touchdown last week was unusual for Riddick. I think he's in play, but I like Gore more. I like Gio more. And I probably like Andre Ellington more.
All right, let's move up to the top tier. We have LaShawn McCoy. We have Melvin Gordon. We have Todd Gurley all in play. Tyrod Taylor, I think, is a big question mark. I probably don't want to play LaShawn McCoy at all if Nathan Peterman starts this game. Would you agree there?
I agree. And then if you said you probably don't want to play McCoy if Tyrod starts, I'd probably agree with that as well.
Oh, you don't want to play McCoy at all?
I mean, I think he's in a great spot. I just he's averaging 16 touches per game. Traveris Cadet is getting 4 or 5 targets per game. LaShawn McCoy, I broke it down in my game by game breakdown this week, but McCoy in their wins when they started 5-2, he was getting 5 to 9 targets every game. And since then it's been 1 to 4 targets, and they've lost all but one game since then. I mean, it's crazy, but I'm just not sold on the workload. If I'm paying $7,200 for a running back, like, it will absolutely not surprise me if LaShawn McCoy has a good game. He's in a good spot. If the workload's there, he'll probably smash. He could even post a 20-point game without the workload, but I don't want to pay $7,200 for 16 touches. That's consistently been the case lately. So I'm kind of off of him this week.
Yeah. I mean, the issue for me is he's 1,400 more than Lamar Miller, and he's only 900 less than Todd Gurley, who has this ridiculous role. I mean, Todd Gurley's role is just like Le'Veon Bell / David Johnson-esque. He's getting targeted like in the 6 to 8 time range per week. He is the unquestioned goal line back. He's playing like 80% of the snaps. I know the matchup against the Eagles isn't great, but Sean McVay has shown an ability to get Todd Gurley into space no matter what. I think Todd Gurley is pretty clearly the best play in this top range. Do you agree? I
agree. I think that people shouldn't consider him a lock for a big game. I mean, you should feel great if you get those 22 to 25 points, because Philly I think they've only allowed 3 running backs to go over 40 yards against them. They're allowing like 300 fewer rushing yards than the next closest team. They're allowing like under 50 rushing yards per game to running backs. So this is not a good spot on the ground for Gurley. But I think, if the Rams shift and go through the air, there's not a good spot for the Rams wide receivers either. So I think we can lock in Gurley for 7 or 8 catches pretty easily. And then, the 40 yards he gets on the ground. Or
7 or 8 targets.
I think 7 or 8 catches, honestly.
Oh, daddy.
And also worth noting that Philly is tremendous stopping running backs after they catch the ball. So, upside is a concern, but it's going to be tough for them to get the ball to Cooper Kupp with Patrick Robinson blanketing him. It's going to be tough for them to get the ball to Sammy Watkins. And Josh Reynolds showed last week that he's not somebody we can trust. So, I mean, I think that Gurley is the guy they're going to have to lean on through the air. I think we get 7 or 8 catches. So with that, I think he's a great play for floor. I don't think he's going to smash. I don't think he's going to get 25 to 30 points just because the matchup is really bad. But I think you could lock him in and just lock in points for sure.
Okay, then let's get your take on Melvin Gordon. You don't love Gurley. You're off LaShawn McCoy. I have concerns about Melvin Gordon, obviously, from an efficiency standpoint, and Austin Eckler continuing to siphon a decent amount of work there. How do you feel about Melvin Gordon up at 7,800, just 300 less than Gurley?
I mean, if he were priced at, I think it's the psychology of pricing, right? If he were priced at like 6,200, we would all be like, oh man, he's so cheap for Melvin Gordon, but is he really even a good play? I kind of think that just because he's priced up there with McCoy and Gurley, people think about playing him. If he were priced at 6K, ownership would probably be a little bit lower than it is at whatever his price is, 7,800, because then that would cause people to think about how poorly he's performed for a large chunk of this year and whether or not they actually want to go there. Won't surprise me if Gordon posts a good game, but I don't think it's worth it for 7,800 given his chances of getting 10 or 11 points.
One guy we didn't mention is Kareem Hunt. Do expect Charkandrick West back from his personal issue for this game. Even with Charkandrick out last week, we saw Kareem Hunt post massive usage. Like, he was on the field for 87 season high percent of the snaps. Still did not get it done in the box score. Another great matchup for him, home against Oakland. As I mentioned, expect Charkandrick back. Any hope for Kareem Hunt at 6,500?
Yeah, this is kind of like the Case Keenum thing, in that I don't see the need to take on this floor. I do think that the ceiling is there. I like Hunt. This is one of my 2 or 3 favorite games to game stack if you're going that route in tournaments. So it makes a lot of sense to get Hunt on a game stack in case this game shoots out, in case the Chiefs finally get some plays close to the goal line and get Hunt some touchdowns. There are 27 running backs who have more carries inside the 10-yard line than Kareem Hunt has this year. So, scoring opportunities have just been thin for him. That's the big issue, but he could certainly smash in this spot. It's just not the likeliest scenario.
Anything else at the running back position?
I'm sure there's plenty others, places to look, but given the way I'm approaching this week, I'm locked into a much narrower core and just trying to take these best plays that we've talked about.
Let's move to the wide receiver position, where Josh Gordon, I believe, will be 40 to 50% owned, which is very, very high for a wide receiver. Obviously wide receiver has a much more volatile and wide range of outcomes than most other or all other positions. We just saw last week this Green Bay defense somehow shut down Mike Evans. Still not exactly sure how. This Packers defense will not have Kevin King, will not have Devon House. They have Demarius Randall, but they are very thin beyond that at the cornerback position. We know Josh Gordon is an exceptional talent. We know he was used in a way I didn't even expect him to be used last week. He ran a route on 89% of DeShone Kizer's dropbacks. Just absurd usage. Saw 11 targets against Casey Hayward. Merits to fading Josh Gordon in tournaments.
Wouldn't it be great if he'd seen 6 targets last week and then everyone was just concerned that maybe he wasn't worth rostering? Then we wouldn't have to have this conversation and we could just lock him in at 20% ownership. There's always merits to fading a wide receiver at this level of ownership. As you alluded to, it's a high variance position compared to running back. We've talked this year about how we're likelier to pivot off of chalk at wide receiver than at running back. With that said, Gordon's not a guy that I want to hop off board on. 5,500, this guy is going to be 7K in a week or two, and he's in a great matchup. As you said, Devon House is out. Devon House covered Mike Evans for much of last week, for whatever that's worth. People have asked me today about the weather. I guess there's going to be wind, but you and I don't tend to worry about weather until Saturday, so maybe that could have an impact. But I think that's likely to have an impact on ownership than on my decision to roster Gordon. I want Gordon this week. You feel like Gordon's a lock in cash games too, right?
Well, of course, yeah. What about, though, if you want to play Kizer, you expose yourself to some systemic risk in this Browns offense, which we've seen have the possibility to at least sputter. I don't think they will this week, but by playing Kizer and Gordon together, at least in cash, you do expose yourself to some downside, no?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the Cleveland Browns. It's crazy. But it's also Josh Gordon. I just think, I don't know, man, the way they used him last week, I guess the case for fading him would be maybe they shift things up. Maybe the Packers scheme everything to slow down Gordon, but I just don't think they can do that. I don't think the Packers can do that. The Browns have too many weapons away from Gordon. So I think that, and again, Gordon was being covered by Casey Hayward, who's probably a top 3 corner and still got 11 targets. There's just not, this is like Mike Evans against Patrick Peterson when he got 18 targets. And it's like, you knew the ball was going there no matter what. I just think we're going to see the targets for Gordon. I'm really not letting ownership dictate things for me here, and I'll just do something different in other spots.
I think below 5K is a little bit thinner than usual on DraftKings. I don't see a ton to love. I think one of the strongest plays below 5K is Deshaun Jackson. We expect Darius Slay to shadow Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson is a season low 4,400 on DraftKings. We know the Lions are 4th in DVOA against number 1 receivers, but 16th against number 2 wide receivers. Makes sense considering how well Darius Slay has played, how badly Nevin Lawson and those guys have struggled all opposite him. So I think Deshaun Jackson's really strong at 4,400. I think D.D. Westbrook is in play. Corey Coleman, I think, is a really interesting pivot off of Josh Gordon. Same awesome matchup. Very strong talent, not as talented as Josh Gordon, but certainly a really strong talent. I thought about Kenny Golladay until we had this Matthew Stafford thing. And then a lot of people have asked me about Trent Taylor, who only played like 40 or 30% of the snaps last week, but certainly seems to have some kind of rapport going with Jimmy Garoppolo already. Any of those guys pique your interest in anybody else below 5K at the wideout position?
I love Coleman. I think that Coleman's an awesome tournament pivot. I said this week that I think Coleman would probably be, just talent-wise, the number 1 receiver on about half the teams in the NFL. I mean, this guy's really good. We haven't seen it much. He's been injured. He's had bad quarterbacks. But this is an Odell Beckham-esque talent as far as what he can do on the field. Not saying that he's as good as Beckham, but, this is a game-breaking guy. And if targets swing his way, or even if Gordon gets 11 and Coleman gets 7 or 8, Coleman could post a monster game. I don't want to go there in cash, obviously, but I think that he's a great play in tournaments. I think playing Kaiser, Gordon, and Coleman together is a strong move in tournaments. Obviously, you expose yourself to risk, but you get a ton of upside. I like that you brought up Westbrook. The Seahawks are not really that great against wide receivers this year. Bottom 10 in catches, bottom 10 in yards allowed. They're not bad, but they're not great. And that was with Richard Sherman out there for much of the year. So I think D.D. is an interesting play. I hadn't thought much about Deshaun Jackson. Everything you said makes a lot of sense. He's not a guy that I've leaned on heavily just because his touchdown expectations are low. But again, 4,400, tons of upside with his big play potential. I think that there's a lot of guys you can go to. I mean, we didn't mention Demaryius Thomas, who's right on that edge. But 1 week after he was 60% owned, Simeon looked awful. But Simeon has looked awful before, and people still wanted Demaryius Thomas last week. I think Demaryius Thomas makes a lot of sense in tournaments. Who else did I miss? You mentioned a couple others.
I think people want to draw the comparison to like little white dude Trent Taylor to little white dude Julian Edelman and be like, oh, you see, Jimmy Garoppolo came from New England and he's going to turn Trent Taylor into Edelman. I don't really see that, but what do you think?
I think Taylor is a guy that I would have a lot of interest in if this were a normal DraftKings week, because I think you could pretty safely lock in. I mean, I do think that Garoppolo has shown a tendency to look toward those underneath routes. We brought that up last week with him focusing on Martellus Bennett and James White and Edelman in New England. We've seen it with Taylor, and tight ends got 7 targets last week. So I think that those kind of 5 to 10 yard downfield, it's this thing of that. I don't think that's where he's looking first, but he knows where that guy is, and he knows that that's his outlet if the guys downfield are covered. So on a normal week, I'd feel safe with Taylor getting 8 to 10 points. I don't think his upside is particularly high. So on this week with a lot of high upside guys we can fit in, I won't be there, but I think that he's a perfectly fine play, in a bigger sense, just not really for this week for me.
Yeah, and he could be part of a game stack. Maybe everybody wants to play Houston guys. You got to think about somewhere to bring it back on San Francisco. You mentioned Marquise Goodwin earlier. To me, the problem with him is he is right next to Sterling Shepard, and maybe that makes Goodwin even a better tournament play. But I think Sterling Shepard's floor is just so much higher than Marquise Goodwin. When Sterling Shepard has been healthy and playing with Eli Manning, he's seen 9 and 13 targets. Like, they don't have a choice but to throw to Evan Ingram. And Sterling Shepard, Orlando Scandrick, not expected to play for the Cowboys, who've been getting beat up by slot receivers anyways. I don't think it's close between Goodwin and Shepard, but I know a lot of people do like Goodwin out there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you as far as expectations. There are concerns for Shepard as far as the way this game will probably play out as far as being slowed down. The hamstring injury that we really don't have much news on at the moment. For all we know, he could be out there, but not 100%. And we find out after the game that was the case. So I don't think that it's crazy to pivot to Goodwin. Goodwin's a guy who, with Beathard under center, was consistently getting 10 to 15 DraftKings points. Last week caught 8 of 8 targets from Garoppolo, put up, 17.9 points without having one of his, big downfield plays. They used him at all levels of the field last week. We know that the Texans can get absolutely torched for long plays, explosive plays. So I think that it's closer than you think, but I think we can lock in Goodwin for 8 targets. I think we can lock in Shepard for 10, and Shepard's a better player, but less explosive. I don't think it's crazy to say that Goodwin has a better quarterback. I think I like Shepard more, but I think it's closer than you think. That's my opinion on it.
This Oakland situation is interesting. Not expecting Amari Cooper to play, although they listed him questionable, but Marcus Peters suspended, not that he's been playing well anyways, but this Kansas City secondary is just so bad. Maybe the pass rush can rise up in a huge game for them at Arrowhead in the division against their rival. But from what we've seen so far, this Kansas City defense is absolutely atrocious. Michael Crabtree is expensive. He's $6,700. That is more than I would typically like to pay for Michael Crabtree. But if no Amari Cooper, we know the secondary situation. I think the floor on Michael Crabtree is very high at $6,700.
I agree on that sentiment as far as floor. I think Silva brought up in his article that in his matchups column on RotoWorld that the Chiefs have gone 11 straight games at home without allowing more than 20 points. So they have played better at home. The thing with the Raiders, I'm less high on Crabtree than probably other people is just, and I like Crabtree. I think his floor is really high. I just think his chance of hitting his ceiling aren't super high. The Raiders are just a really, they want to march down the field. They're not going for explosive plays. That's not the way their offense is designed. Both Crabtree and Cooper are basically used, 8 to 15 yards downfield on almost all of their routes. So the chances of Crabtree putting up a 9 for 150, something crazy like that, I think is pretty low just because of the way that the Raiders run this offense. I do think that you can easily lock them in for, an 8 for 70 game, and then anything over that is bonus. But upside's a little bit of a concern given what his price is.
We have 3 guys in the low 7K range that I think are all in play, and you can make a pretty good case that 2 of them are underpriced. The 2 that I think are underpriced are AJ Green at $7,300, didn't get the price bump because he played on Monday night last week, and Adam Thielen, who's coming off of a kind of outlier 5-target game. But I already mentioned what I think about using wide receivers against the Panthers. I think it's a very sneaky, strong play. If you think the Vikings and Case Keenum will play well, I can be very certain that Adam Thielen is going to be involved. And then the third guy is a guy that I probably won't be playing, but certainly a good matchup for a big play is Tyreek Hill. Out of those 3 guys, who do you like most?
Out of those 3, probably Thielen, then Green, then Tyreek Hill. I think the upside's the same on all of them, but floor goes in that order. So that's the way I would lean. I agree with you. I think Thielen gets back up to at least 8 targets this week. Even though the Panthers limit volume on the other side, for offenses against them, Thielen's range has been 8 to 12 targets. I don't think he gets to 12 targets this week, but he should still get to 8. He's still the priority. In the pass game, the Panthers are nails against tight ends, so play volume is lowered, but a couple extra targets are filtered toward wide receivers. I like Thielen quite a bit in tournaments. AJ Green, great spot. Chicago has struggled against number 1 wide receivers the last month and a half, and the targets are there for Green. Obviously, the concern there is just game flow if the Bengals take a huge lead. And then Tyreek Hill is what he always is, 6 to 8 targets, a couple of them downfield, a couple of them at the line of scrimmage, and you hope he breaks a long play. Obviously, against Oakland, he can break a long play.
A couple notes on that Chicago-Cincy game. Cincinnati expected to be missing five starters on defense, including both their cornerbacks, including their heart and soul kind of Vontaze Burfict. And then on the other side, the Bears, who lost a ton of guys to injury, down Leonard Floyd, down Adrian Amos, down Danny Trevathan, down Eddie Goldman. Both these defenses are not what maybe we think of them. So maybe it could be more shootout potential than maybe on the surface in this game. How would you feel about playing AJ Green and Gio in the same lineup in a tournament?
I'd be fine with it, but not because of shootout upside. I mean, the Bears, we've talked about this, they're way more concerned with losing close than with trying to win games. When they fall behind, they still go run heavy. They still slow down the pace. It's a big issue for, games against the Bears. If they're down 14 points in the fourth quarter, they're going to punt the ball. They're not going for it on fourth down on their side of the field trying to win. This is like a really pathetically run team as far as worrying more about the optics than about actually winning games. So I think that and we've also seen the Bengals play well in the secondary without Adam Jones, without Dre Kirkpatrick. I genuinely think that their good defensive play is more about good coaching, disciplined play, good scheme than the individual players, minus Burfict, who does make a big difference. So I like Green, but not from that perspective. I think it's just that Green and Gio are this whole offense, so they can do well even without the Bears doing well on the other side.
One big question people are going to be asking themselves this week is, I have room for one very expensive wideout. Should it be Keenan Allen or should it be DeAndre Hopkins? Keenan Allen comes in as the hottest wide receiver in the history of the NFL. 3 straight games, 10-plus catches, 100-plus yards, 1+ TDs. Has a fine matchup against the Redskins. DeAndre Hopkins, you can make a case, has one of the best possible matchups against San Francisco. Quarterback play, edge obviously goes to Keenan. Do you have a preference between Keenan and DeAndre Hopkins?
I like Hopkins a little bit more. The bigger question for me is, do you have a preference between Hopkins, Keenan, and Gurley? How would you rank those 3? If you can fit 2, who would you want?
Probably the 2 wideouts. I think they both are, like, I projected Hopkins, I think, for 11 targets and Keenan for 10, and that's conservative. I always do targets on the conservative end just because you never know what's going to happen with game flow, but there's certainly upside for a lot more on those. But yeah, we already talked about the matchup concerns for Todd Gurley, who I certainly like, but matchup concerns are not there for Keenan and Hopkins.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that, to be clear, like, there's obviously a chance that Hopkins or Keenan just bomb and get you 8 points, whereas that's less likely with Gurley. But I think Gurley is far less likely than these 2 to post you, 30 points or something like that. So I think there's a lot of roster constructions where you can fit in 2, and I would love to have these 2 guys over Gurley. But I like all 3 plays. I like Hopkins first, Keenan Allen second. The concern, obviously, with Washington is they have good pieces in their secondary. We've also, though, seen them get flamed by Doug Baldwin, get flamed by Adam Thielen. Thielen's probably the closest comp in the NFL to Keenan Allen in terms of how their offenses use them, what their skill sets are, what makes them good players. Thielen put up, I think it was 8 for 166 and a touchdown against them. He put up like over 30 DraftKings points. So I like Keenan a ton. I like Hopkins a ton. I'd love to have both of them this week.
2 guys we didn't mention, which was my fault. The first, your boy, Old Man Fitz, yada, yada, yada. Everybody knows what the deal is. But also we skipped over Will Fuller, who is expected back from his rib injury. Will Fuller, yet another Texan, certainly has an awesome matchup. Would be an interesting pivot for me off of DeAndre Hopkins. How viable do you think that is? I mean, Will Fuller is, I don't even have his price in front of me. I think he's like 4,300 or something. Like, you could save a ton of money. The problem is Tom Savage is not the kind of quarterback necessarily that Will Fuller works the best with.
Yeah, I think we can get 20 points without taking on the 5-point floor that Fuller gives you. But, it wouldn't surprise me if Fuller popped off. He's not a guy I have interest in. I think that Fitz is one of the safest and honestly highest upside plays on the slate. We've seen him get 30-plus points multiple times this year, and he's going to get 10 or more targets from Gabbert. So I love him this week as well. I mean, I think he's genuinely in the conversation with Keenan Allen and DeAndre Hopkins in terms of, like, do you want a second cheap running back and 2 high-priced wide receivers, or do you want to go up to like the Lamar Miller range and drop down from one of those high-priced guys to Fitz? I think that either way works. I think that Fitz, should get you 20 points this week. So I like him quite a bit.
Anything else at the wide receiver position?
No, I was waiting for you to ask that so I could bring up Fitz, but there you have it.
Just roll out like the Fitz, Frank Gore. Like who else can we play that just makes me sick? I don't even know. You could play Jason Witten too.
Jason Witten.
Yeah. All right.
Good.
And with
that's a good transition.
Yeah, I'm a real professional at this hosting thing now. We are going to move on to tight ends with that transition. I want to start the low end because I may have gotten too high on Steven Anderson, but let me make my case here for Steven Anderson. No CJ Fedorowicz. Ryan Griffin is also on IR. Inside slot man Bruce Ellington is also out. Braxton Miller is also going to miss. We are looking at Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins on the outside, and then running back Andre Ellington in the slot. Steven Anderson is one of only 2 tight ends on the entire roster for the Texans. The other one is Michael Pruitt. He gets to face San Francisco, who I know has been okay or maybe even good against tight ends, but from a macro perspective, it's such a good spot for the Texans offense. Steven Anderson saw 12 targets last week. Steven Anderson was a wide receiver growing up. Like, he has that kind of skill set, really flashed in the broad jump and vertical jump at the combine. Am I crazy for thinking that Steven Anderson is super safe at 3,200?
Am I crazy for thinking you are considering proposing to him? I mean, that was intense. You brought up the broad jump.
I've been reading so much about him. It's all in my brain now.
Anderson had 6 targets the last time that Ryan Griffin and Fedorowicz were both out. He and CJ combined for, I think it was 5, 7, and 8 targets in their last 3 games together. So I think you can easily pencil him in for 6 targets as a floor. And again, Braxton Miller, Bruce Ellington. Miller is not really heavily used. Ellington kind of took Will Fuller's target. So I don't think that there's a massive target bump. I think the 12 was a fluky outlier, but I think 6 to 8 targets is reasonable. And look, 6 to 8 targets at 3,200, I'm not going to quibble with that. I mean, that's a fantastic play. It's hard to, like, the best tight end on the slate is Travis Kelce, and you're looking at 8 to 10 targets for Kelce for 7,400. So, I mean, if this were a normal week, Anderson would be a lock for me at 32. With how much value there is, how many decisions we have to make, how easy it is for me to fit Kelce along with other guys I like. I may not end up there myself, but I think Anderson's a great play. I think he's going to go overdrafted just because of all the hype around him. But I think he's a great play. I mean, I think you're locking in 6 to 8 targets.
I do expect Zach Ertz to play on Sunday, but it is notable that they did list him questionable. If he doesn't play, do you have a take between Trey Burton and Anderson?
Yeah, I like Anderson more. Burton in a tough matchup, I don't think that the targets are as reliable.
All right, let's keep moving up at tight end. Hunter Henry has seemingly found the role for sure, and I know I've said that before, but like, it seems like now they're finally like, okay, Antonio Gates is done. Like, I actually dropped Antonio Gates from my dynasty team, this super deep dynasty team. I was like, finally, like, they got rid of him. I was just waiting to drop him. I think Hunter Henry is just such a great talent, like, regardless of matchup, regardless of anything else. Like, he's just such an awesome talent. He's 4,600. I think he is at least in play. Jimmy Graham matchup isn't great, but he is such like he's basically their goal line back. He is 5K. Kyle Rudolph has an atrocious matchup, so I likely won't go there, but he is like their first read in the red zone on so many different plays. Anybody in the mid-range stick out to you at tight end?
Yeah, Austin Seferian-Jenkins as a guy who is, really the only guy the Jets will be able to throw to with, consistent success against Denver. He's viable. Cameron Brate, whose snap counts and routes run have dropped. It's like Dirk Cutter is pulling Cameron Brate out of the conversation, and Jameis Winston is fighting to keep him in the conversation. So, I mean, I think that Brate is still viable. Hunter Henry, I mean, he had 2 to 5 targets in 5 straight games before he faced Cleveland, who just filters targets to the tight end. So I don't think that the targets are reliable. With that said, look, if the guy gets 7 targets, this is one of the most talented tight ends in football and a great matchup. So I'm fine betting on the 7 targets and tourneys. I won't go there in cash. I would rather go up to Kelce or down to Anderson, with salary so flexible this week. But in tournaments, I love taking a shot on Henry. Witten has always smashed against the Giants. I think he's a fine floor play. Jack Doyle is going to get tons of targets again against the Bills defense that's mediocre against tight ends. And like you said, Jimmy Graham, yeah, he's their goal line back. Not a great matchup. There's just so many ways we could go at tight end. I mean, I think Anderson and Kelsey are the best plays, but any of these other guys, including Delaney, Ingram, Ertz, could all get you 15 to 20 points as well.
Yeah, we kind of glossed over Evan Ingram there, but I mean, such a talented dude and one of two guys that Eli Manning is comfortable throwing to. So yeah, I think Evan Ingram will go overlooked, and Zach Ertz, if he gets cleared late, which it looks like that's what's going to happen, he will be massively under-owned. Matchup sucks, but such a talented dude as well. Real quick on Kelsey, this matchup I think stands out more than most. But tell the people why at 7,400 Kelsey is such a standout.
For me, it's just how easy it is to fit a guy who, in a position where targets are generally up and down, and this guy is reliably the main piece of the Chiefs' offense. If you look at his ADOT, it looks like he's kind of used more in the short areas of the field, but that's because he's given so many short targets, 1 yard, 2 yard targets just to get the ball in his hands. He's also used pretty heavily downfield, used heavily in the red zone. Great matchup, a game that the Chiefs need in order to make the playoffs. Obviously, you look at his game logs, there's some of these 1-point games, 7-point games sprinkled in there, but there's also a lot of 20 to 27-point games. I mean, this is just a ceiling you can't get from other tight ends. You can't just lock in a high likelihood of 20 to 27 points at this position, and he's easy enough to fit that I like him quite a bit this week.
Let's move to defense. For the first time in a while, I feel like there's not one defense that people are like zoning in on. I do think that the best play is the Chargers, given how much the Redskins skew towards the pass and the way the Chargers rush the passer and make plays in the secondary. But they're 3,600. We'll see if Nathan Peterman starts, but I think if Tyrod starts, I think the Bills' defense is somewhat interesting against this Colts team that takes the most sacks in the entire NFL. Jacoby Brissett, obviously, extremely mistake prone. The Vikings stood out to me as just an awesome, talented defense. That's 2,700. And obviously, I already said that I thought the Browns were going to win the game. If we do think the Browns are going to win the game and they're facing this guy, Brett Hundley, who is officially dead to me, I think Cleveland at 2,600 is in play. Any thoughts on defense? Do you see one that stands out to you?
Yeah, the Chargers are the one that I've wanted to get. I've had a lot of teams where I can make the rest of my team look significantly better with, the difference between going Sterling Shepard or some scrub below 5K at wide receiver by dropping from the Chargers down to the Bills. I don't love that, but I think it's viable. And I think that the Jets at Denver are viable as a tourney play just because of how bad Simeon looked last week. He's not that bad, but if he continues to look that bad, the Jets would obviously, the Dolphins put up like 27 points. So you could target the quarterback play in that spot. I mean, with that, you could also target the Packers. I just think that Kaiser is going to be less mistake prone when he can get the ball downfield as he can with these new weapons.
Yeah, and the Packers' price has been adjusted all the way up to 3,700. If Nathan Peterman does start, do you want to play the Colts at 3,500?
Man, that's rough, isn't it? It's like
it's crazy.
I know. I'd rather take the Chargers. I mean, I'm keeping an eye on, obviously, on Williams and Moses, the two tackles for Washington. It looks likely that they'll play. Hopefully they don't, which would make this an even better spot. But either way, I think that the Chargers will be able to get after Kirk Cousins traveling across the country, still decimated on the offensive line. He has not looked the same without Chris Thompson. So I think the Chargers are just a really strong play at 3,600. Definitely the safest play on the board this week. And then, branch out from there.
We haven't even mentioned the best defense in the NFL, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Seahawks offensive line is not good. It's hard to sack Russ because he's so slippery, escaping the pocket. But I do think Jacksonville will be less owned than normal and are so aggressive and good. So I think they're at least in play at 3,500. Anybody else on defense?
No, I don't contribute much to the defense conversation.
Yeah, just throw a dart. Hopefully you get some scoop and score or something. That's how you win. Okay.
Do we want to talk about kickers too for FanDuel before we move on?
No, I don't try to tilt me. Just play Greg the Leg every week. Greg the Leg, it's like I don't even want to talk about it. I'm so tilted. Okay. The people need picks. We're running out of time here. They need their stacks. We're going to do one chalky stack and one contrarian stack. Why don't you go first with one of those?
I will go with a chalky stack, and it is just going in tournaments complete game stack of San Francisco, Houston. I think that you can take 4 or 5 guys in this game and average 20 points per player if you pick the right guys. So I think that stacking that game a few different ways in lower dollar tournaments is a pretty good way to a high scoring game. And I know that we're going a little over time, but it doesn't really matter. So just want to talk real quickly about that and just point out, when you're stacking a game, these teams that have a guy or 2 guys who can just score really quickly are huge. That's one reason why I like this stack more than the Chiefs versus the Raiders, because Tyreek Hill can score quickly, but the Raiders just don't have that piece. Last week we saw it with Robbie Anderson and Tyreek Hill. I had a team in the top 60 in the Millie Maker before Josh Reynolds decided to be awful in the late games. Just stacking that game because, when you have 2 guys like Anderson and Tyreek Hill who can score quickly, that can create a lot of back and forth. So with guys like Goodwin, Will Fuller, DeAndre Hopkins, there's just a lot of opportunity for this game to turn into a quick back and forth game. I think it's a really strong tournament stack this week.
Yep, I think that's sharp point there. I will go with a chalky stack, and it is DeShone Kizer to Josh Gordon. I don't think it's going to get much chalkier than that for a stack, but DeShone Kizer's legs give him such a high floor. Josh Gordon's role and matchup gives him a really high floor in this spot, and you're only spending, around 10K to get both these guys in your lineup for 2 spots. So I think that'll be a really popular stack, but I do think that is a pretty high floor, safe one.
All right. My contrarian stack will be Matthew Stafford to Marvin Jones. We skipped over Jones in the wide receiver discussion. I think that'll happen to people as they skip over Stafford, given the hand issue. I think that we're going to go into this game without news and just hope that Stafford looks like himself. I actually think that he won't be able to push the ball outside the numbers, but if I'm wrong, if he's able to, we have a guy in Jones who's topped 85 yards in 6 out of 7 games in the best wide receiver matchup in the NFL. I mean, if this guy's low owned and Stafford's healthy, you have a shot at a 30-point game, with nobody on him. So I think that's worth taking a shot on in tournaments, even without news on Stafford this week.
I'm going to go way off the board here for my contrarian stack, but it includes one of the best players in the NFL, so it shouldn't be that contrarian. It is Andy Dalton to AJ Green. I think a lot of people are going to find themselves going all the way up to Hopkins or Keenan Allen and kind of forget about AJ Green, who's massively underpriced, I think, at 7,300. I do expect, as JM alluded to, a more pass-heavy approach from the Bengals in this game against the Bears should lead to more volume for Andy Dalton, who, given the current state of quarterback play in the NFL, Andy Dalton is not bad. People want to crush Andy Dalton. He's so much better than a lot of these other guys out there. So I will go with that for my contrarian stack.
All right.
That is going to do it for a Week 14 edition of quote-unquote expert, quote-unquote roundtable. I do have news. Next week, I will not be here. I'm going to Miami. I'm running a 1-mile race against Bales and Brandon Adams. I am planning to get injected with EPO or something beforehand, so I have a chance. If I'm not dead, I will be back for the Week 16 expert roundtable.
I have news. I am boycotting next week's show. We will still run it. It will be an hour of dead air. So
that's not true. The show will go on. You guys don't need me. The
show will go on.
The show will go on. For JM, for Jerry, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.